In this movement here, we're going to go through a dumbbell row in a 45-degree back extension. Now, I think one of the things to point out with movements like this is they are fantastic to focus on a certain movement pattern, like the row, and advance it with the intent of, say, strengthening or putting stress and strain on another pattern or motion that we also need to strengthen up, okay? So in some ways, we're staying stable and engaged with our lower body, but we're gonna be putting stress on what is our posterior chain, whereas normally when we go through a motion, not that we wouldn't be putting stress and strain on our posterior chain, it's just another way of doing so. We're curling a lot more. We're certainly going to be a lot more engaged with the musculature close to, say, the back of the knee, the calf, the hamstring, the glutes, and everything like that. What I don't want you to get this confused with is movements where we just sort of add difficulty for the sake of adding difficulty, okay? So it's not that we just want to make the dumbbell row more difficult. If we want to advance our dumbbell row, it's important to obviously get stronger in it, take it into sort of like a single arm motion, many different ways, many different variations. So don't think that for the sake of doing this on the back extension, we're just trying to make it more difficult. There is an intent and a focus often along with these movements where we might change up the position, okay? So when we're setting this up, you've obviously got your two dumbbells ready to go and you've selected a good relevant weight. When you're setting up the 45-degree back extension, you want to set it up where the pad is sort of close to the hips to some degree. Oftentimes when we're actually doing a full back extension motion, we might have it a little bit lower, but for this position here, we're not really going to be moving too much with the legs. So that's why we have it set a little bit closer. You can also play around with the degree of knee bend. So for some of us, the reason why we might be introducing this is we might have very little tolerance in our knee to stay fully locked out and extended. By continuing through the row motion, you can see the stress and strain on the back of the area is going to increase over time, and that's going to help us as long as we progressively overload the tissue to obviously address some underlying weaknesses. Now, you just might be at the point where that's a little bit too much for the time being. So given that, we might have to experiment with just a little bit more knee bend. So you can see from here the idea of driving my knees forward a little bit more takes me out of full extension with the intent of potentially doing it over time with a little bit more, okay? Keep that in mind. I also want to drive my hips, the front of my hips into the pad, squeezing my bum, and you can see here, keeping my spine relatively long, keeping it neutral to some degree almost. I don't want to sit into this with a lot of extension because it might not be the intent of the position. That being said, you might actually have it where you are focusing on this row motion with a lot more extension. It's not that movement is wrong, it just might not be the best option for us straight away. Or we might experiment with a little bit more flexion. Once again, things to play around with over time. I will have pointed out if that's something that I do want you to experiment, or I want you to try have a little bit more flexion, or I want you to try to actually go into a little bit more extension with the spine, okay? But for today's demo, we're just gonna keep the spine relatively neutral as we go through. So I've got my position with the legs, I've got a good position with my hips, squeezing my bum. Now from here, the row motion, like any sort of row motion, we want to make sure that we get full protraction of the scapula. So I'm allowing my arms to relax, my scapula to spread wide and separate. I pull them down and back into position first, and then I pull with the elbows up. I get a good contraction across the middle of the scapula, pinching them together, squeezing the elbows in nice and tight, getting full length as I go through. Now, as I've said, this is going to be tough enough for the arms, but I can already feel the stress and strain on the back of the legs increasing over time. My core is obviously being challenged as well to not just completely drop down from this sort of position. So plenty of stress and strain on the posterior chain in this movement here. Okay, so any sort of questions on this? I'm sure there might be. Be sure to leave them in the comment section below. If you like this video, or if you think someone might find it relevant, be sure to share it with them. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future where I teach athletes how to improve their strength and mobility, be sure to subscribe to the page too. All right, folks, but for the moment, I'll see you soon.